As the world becomes more and more dependent on technology, the semiconductor industry has grown in importance, with its products powering everything from our phones and laptops to self-driving cars and military defense systems. The United States and China are two of the largest players in this industry, but their relationship is far from straightforward. For decades, the United States has been the leader in semiconductor technology and production, but China has been making significant investments to catch up and even surpass the U.S. in this field. This has led to a race between the two nations to secure the best technology, talent, and intellectual property, and to gain the upper hand in this crucial industry. The tension between the U.S. and China in the semiconductor industry is not only a commercial one, it is also a strategic one. The technology and products produced by this industry play a critical role in the national security and the economic prosperity of nations. The U.S. sees China's rise in the semiconductor industry as a threat to its own technological superiority and to its ability to maintain its dominant position in the world. In this video, we'll be exploring the key events and factors that have shaped the relationship between the U.S. and China and the semiconductor industry, and how this has impacted both nations and the world. We'll also be looking at the challenges and opportunities that lie ahead as these two nations continue to compete and cooperate in this crucial field. So join us as we delve into the complex and important relationship between the U.S. and China in the semiconductor industry. The rise of these countries as major players in the semiconductor industry was driven by a combination of factors, including lower costs of production, highly skilled labor, and government support for their respective tech sectors. The U.S. government realized the importance of the semiconductor industry to national security and began to take steps to protect it. In the late 1990s and early 2000s, the U.S. government provided significant funding for research and development in the semiconductor industry and worked to ensure that U.S. companies remained competitive. Despite these efforts, China's rise as a major player in the semiconductor industry has been one of the defining stories of the 21st century. Over the past decade, the Chinese government has invested heavily in the industry and has encouraged its domestic chip companies to grow and expand. This investment has paid off, and today, China is home to some of the largest chip manufacturers in the world and is responsible for a significant portion of the world's semiconductor production. As China's semiconductor industry has grown, so too has its competition with the U.S. The two nations are now locked in a struggle for dominance in the industry, and this struggle is about much more than just market share or tariffs. It's about security. The U.S. views the semiconductor industry as critical to national security and is concerned that China's dominance in the industry could lead to the U.S. being dependent on China for key components. Meanwhile, China views the U.S. continued dominance in the semiconductor industry as a threat to its own national security and is working to reduce its dependence on U.S.-made chips. This struggle is complex and multifaceted, and it has far-reaching implications for the global economy, international trade, and national security. In today's video, we'll explore this relationship in more detail and discuss the key players, the challenges they face, and the implications for the future. In the late 1950s, when the semiconductor chip was first invented in the United States, China was lagging behind in this industry. The U.S. government, recognizing the strategic importance of computing power, formed a close partnership with chip companies and blocked China's access to chips during the Cold War. As a result, many of China's brightest scientists and engineers were driven out of the country by Mao Zedong's policies, leaving China far behind the U.S. in this field. However, the Chinese government was determined to catch up. In the decades that followed, the government made significant investments in research and development and education, as well as encouraging foreign investment in the country. This led to a gradual rise in the sophistication of China's semiconductor industry, and by the 1990s, the U.S. had become friendlier with China and lifted most of its export controls. This change in policy opened up new opportunities for chip companies who could now move their assembly operations to China, taking advantage of its lower labor costs. By the early 2000s, China had become a dominant force in the manufacturing and assembly of semiconductor chips, with many leading chip companies setting up shop in the country. Today, China is a major player in the global semiconductor industry, with a rapidly growing domestic market and a growing presence in international markets. The U.S. and China are now locked in a struggle over the semiconductor industry, with each nation seeking to secure its position in this crucial and rapidly evolving field. To achieve this goal, China initiated its Made in China 2025 plan, which has aimed to make China self-sufficient in advanced technologies and manufacturing. This involved investing heavily in domestic semiconductor research and development, acquiring advanced technology through mergers and acquisitions, and offering incentives to chip companies to set up production in China. The Chinese government also focused on building its own semiconductor ecosystem, with a particular emphasis on designing and producing its own chips for high-tech applications like artificial intelligence, robotics, and 5G communications. The U.S. saw China's growing influence in the semiconductor industry as a threat, both in terms of competition and national security. The U.S. government became increasingly concerned about China's increasing control over the global chip supply chain and feared that China could use this control to restrict access to critical technologies and limit the competitiveness of the U.S. chip companies. In response, the U.S. has taken several steps to curb China's advancement, including tightening regulations on chip exports to China and pressuring U.S. chip companies to reduce their dependence on Chinese production. The relationship between the U.S. and China in the semiconductor industry is a complex one, with both nations competing for dominance while also cooperating in many areas. The outcome of this struggle will have far-reaching implications for both nations and the global tech industry, and it's important to understand the key players, their motivations, and the broader implications for the global economy and international relations. The semiconductor industry is an essential component of many modern technologies, and its impact extends far beyond the tech sector. It affects national security, economic prosperity, and the competitiveness of nations in the global market. As the world becomes increasingly reliant on technology, the semiconductor industry will only become more critical, and the competition between the U.S. and China will likely intensify. It's important to keep in mind that this struggle is not just between two countries, but also between private companies and the governments of both nations. The interests of these various players can be aligned, but they can also be at odds, which makes the relationship between the U.S. and China in the semiconductor industry even more complicated. Understanding the relationship between these players and their motivations will be key to understanding the future of the semiconductor industry and the role that the U.S. and China will play in it. As the world becomes more and more reliant on technology, the importance of the semiconductor industry will only continue to grow. The outcome of the struggle between the United States and China will have a major impact on the future of technology, shaping the direction of innovation and determining which country will have the upper hand in the global technological race. The relationship between the U.S. and China is constantly evolving, and both nations will have to find ways to balance competition and cooperation in order to succeed. The U.S. government must find ways to ensure its own technological advantage while also fostering a thriving semiconductor industry and engaging in fair trade practices. Meanwhile, the Chinese government must find ways to build a secure and sustainable domestic semiconductor industry while also addressing the concerns of the U.S. and other countries. Ultimately, the semiconductor industry is a prime example of the complex and interconnected relationship between technology, politics, and economics in the modern world. The struggle between the U.S. and China will continue to shape the future of this industry and will have significant implications for both nations and the world as a whole. We hope that this video has been helpful and informative. For more content on this and other relevant topics, please make sure to subscribe to our channel and hit the like button to show your support. Your engagement helps us continue to create and provide valuable insights and information. Thanks for watching.